There's a room on the fourth floor of a building on Chicago's near west side where people go to finish. Nora Bennett had worked in it for 11 years. And in that time she had learned the one thing nobody outside those walls understands, that at the very end, when there is nothing left to protect, people tell the truth. They tell it to whoever is holding the cup. And for 11 years, the person holding the cup had been a heavy-set night nurse that no one in the city of Chicago had ever once considered worth looking at. She had 400 confessions in her head and no idea what any of them were worth. Then a dying man in room 6 reached up, caught her wrist with more strength than a dying man should have, and said the name of the person who had destroyed her father. And his son was standing in the doorway. The wind came off the lake that January, like it had been sent for somebody specific. Nora took the blue line in at 9:40 every night and walked the last 4 blocks with her hood up and her chin down, past a shuttered currency exchange and a corner where the streetlight had been out since November. St. Bridget Palliative occupied the top 2 floors of a converted brick warehouse on Ogden. 14 beds, 1 elevator that worked, a chapel nobody used except the staff. At 3 in the morning, mostly to sit down, she badged in at 9:58 and was on the floor by 10. The night shift at a hospice is not what people imagine. It is not a long vigil. It is 100 small errands strung together, turning a body every 2 hours so the skin doesn't break down, chasing an ice chip, changing a gown at 4 a.m. because a man who commanded 300 employees is now embarrassed about a bed, sitting for 40 minutes with a woman who is afraid to fall asleep because she suspects, correctly, that this is the night. Nora was extraordinarily good at it. She had the 2 things you cannot teach. She did not flinch ever at anything a body did, and she could sit in silence without needing it to end. "Room 6 is up," Grace Molina said, handing off. Grace was 58, built like a fire hydrant, and had been on days at St. Bridget since the place opened. "He's been up since 4 this afternoon. Won't take the lorazepam. Won't take the morphine at the ordered dose. Won't sleep." He fired 2 aides. Fired 2 aides. Told them to get out and don't come back, which around here is functionally the same thing. Grace lowered her voice. "Nora, do you know who's in 6? Aurelio V. That's all the board says. That's all the board is going to say." Grace tucked her chart under her arm. "Aurelio Vitale, 81 years old. He ran the West Side out of a social club on Grand Avenue for 30 years, and the reason nobody's outside with a camera is that people in the city are still afraid of him. And he weighs 112 pounds and cannot lift a glass of water." She paused at the door. "His son comes at 11, every night. 11 exactly. And you'll understand when you see it," Grace said. "Just don't be clever at him, honey. Be normal." Nora went into room 6 with a cup of ice and no particular opinion. Aurelio Vitale was propped up too high, the way patients get when 3 different people have adjusted the bed and none of them asked. His eyes were the only part of him that had any weight left. They came over to her and stayed. "You're new. I'm nights. You've been asleep for my last 4. I don't sleep. I know. Grace told me. She also told me you fired 2 aides. They talked to me like I was a child. A breath, loud, slow, as if the dying part is in the ears." Nora put the ice down within reach of his right hand, which she had already noticed was the one that still worked properly. "For what it's worth," she said, "you're not going to like the reason they do that. Tell me anyway. They're frightened of you." She cranked the bed down 2 notches without asking, because it was wrong and she was not going to leave it wrong. Fear makes people loud. It's the only volume they've got. Aurelio Vitale looked at her for a long moment. "What's your name?" "Nora." "Nora." He tested it. "You're not frightened of me." "Mr. Butt." "Vitale, I have washed the hands of a man who ran half the produce market and a woman who taught 4th grade for 40 years, and I couldn't tell you which was which by the hands." She adjusted his pillow. "Down here, everybody's the same weight." Something moved in the ruined face. It might have been amusement. "Sit down," he said. "I have 13 other rooms. They're asleep. Sit down. Have 13 other rooms. They're asleep. Sit down. She sat down. It was, she would think later, the single most consequential decision of her adult life. And it felt at the time like nothing at all. Her mother had been a nurse, too. That was the thing people never got about Nora Bennett. She had not fallen into this. Margaret Bennett had done 31 years on the oncology floor at Mercy, and she had raised her daughter on the idea that the last hours of a person's life are a job, and that it is a good job, and that somebody has to be able to do it. Margaret was 66 now, in a 3-flat in Bridgeport with a stairway she could no longer manage, on the far side of a stroke that had taken the right half of her face and most of the words for objects. She could say that thing. She could not say cup. She knew it, which was the cruelty of it. She was entirely present inside a mouth that had stopped cooperating. The neurology follow-up and the speech therapy and the aide who came 4 hours a day added up to $5,800 a month, of which insurance covered $1,100. That was the first number. The second number was older. Thomas Bennett had owned 4 neighborhood pharmacies on the south side. Bennett Drug, in white letters on green awnings, at Halstead, at Land, at 63rd, at Archer. He compounded for people who couldn't afford the chains. He carried tabs for half of Bridgeport through 2 recessions. He was, by every account Nora ever collected, an unremarkable and completely honest man. In the autumn she turned 22. Federal agents walked into all 4 stores on the same Tuesday morning. Counterfeit oncology medication, hundreds of thousands of dollars of it, moving through a supply chain that ended at a licensed wholesaler in Cicero and began nowhere anyone could prove. Thomas Bennett's DEA number was on every purchase order. Thomas Bennett's signature was on the receiving logs. He said the same thing for 19 months, to his lawyer, to a jury, to his daughter. Through a phone in a visiting room, I bought from the wholesaler my father bought from. I never saw a single one of those boxes. The wholesaler was called Lakeshore Medical Supply. It went into voluntary dissolution 4 months after his conviction. Its assets absorbed by a holding company, and the holding company had one name on the incorporation filing. Nora had that filing in a shoebox under her bed with 800 other pages. She had read the name so many times it had stopped looking like language. C. Bruno. Her father died at Terre Haute in the 3rd year of a 14-year sentence. Sepsis from an infected tooth in a federal medical facility. He was 59. At 10:10, Gerald Thorne came out of the administrative office he had no business being in at that hour. Gerald was the director of nursing, which at St. Nolt, Bridget meant he built the schedule, controlled the overtime, and had not touched a patient since 2016. He wore a fleece vest with the facility's logo on it, as though it were a rank. Bennett. A word. I'm mid-round. It'll keep. He didn't ask. He simply walked, and she followed because 11 years had taught her what happens to people who don't. I'm restructuring nights. You're going from 5 to 3. Nora stopped in the corridor. 3 shifts. 3. Gerald, that's under the benefits threshold. It's a census question. It's not personal. He was already looking at his phone. And listen, while I've got you, the founder's reception is on the 9th. Board's coming, donors are coming. I've got you on the floor that night, but if you're going to be visible, I need you to be presentable. Uniform that fits. Something in the, you know. His hand made a vague ring in the air at the level of her waist, the way a man indicates a stain on a carpet. We're representing. I'm a nurse. I'll be in scrubs. Right, but there are scrubs and there are scrubs, said Gerald Thorne, and walked off and never once in his life thought about it again. Nora stood in the corridor for 11 seconds with her hands loose at her sides. Then she went back to work because room 9 had a woman in it who was going to die at 4 in the morning and would prefer not to do it alone. And Nora Bennett had never in 11 years let a single one of them do it alone. At 11 o'clock exactly, the elevator opened. She was at the medication cart at the end of the corridor, with her back mostly turned, and what she noticed first was not a person. It was that the floor changed. There is a particular sound a hospice makes at night. A low, continuous machine hum, the compressor on the ice machine, somebody's television 2 rooms down, an aide's shoes. All of it kept going. Nothing stopped. And yet the whole corridor seemed to lean very slightly, the way water in a glass leans when the train starts moving, and Nora looked up. 2 men had come out of the elevator. The first was enormous, 6'5", shoulders that had to consider the door frame, a nose that had been broken and set by someone in a hurry. He came out first and stood and did nothing, and everything about the way he did nothing said that he had already counted the exits. The second man was not large at all. He was maybe 40, dark overcoat, no scarf, wet at the shoulders from 4 blocks of wind. He had a face that gave away absolutely nothing and did not appear to be withholding anything either. It simply had no traffic on it. Dark hair with a streak of early gray above the left temple. He crossed the corridor without hurrying and without making noise. And the aide at the far station, a woman who had worked here 9 years and was afraid of nothing, put her head down over her charting and kept it there. He went into room 6 and closed the door. Grace had stayed late to finish a note. She materialized at Nora's elbow. "That's the son," Grace said. "I gathered. Damiano." Grace watched the closed door. "He's been here every night for 6 weeks, 11 o'clock. He stays about an hour. He's never once raised his voice, never once asked for anything, never once complained about the food. And he sent a check in October that paid for the new lift in the tub room and told the board not to put his name on it." She folded her arms. "And I want you to understand something, honey. Every single person on this floor is more scared of that man than they ever were of his father." "Why?" "Because the father is dying," said Grace. "And he isn't. He came out at 15 past midnight." Nora was in the corridor with a warm blanket in her arms, and there was nowhere to be except where she was. He stopped in front of her. "You changed his bed height. It was up too far. He couldn't get his elbow under him. He didn't ask you to change it." "He wouldn't," Nora said. "He'd sit in it wrong for 6 weeks before he'd ask." Damiano Vitale looked at her for the first time. She had spent her whole adult life being scanned. She knew all the varieties, the flick down and away, the smile that arrives a half-second late, the particular warmth of somebody relieved not to be you. She had built a system for absorbing it that worked so well she had almost forgotten it was running. He did none of it. He looked at her face and stayed there. "He talked to you for 40 minutes, he said. "He hasn't talked to me for 40 minutes in 9 years. He mostly told me the aides are loud. They are loud. They're frightened." "Yes," said Damiano Vitale. "They generally are." He put his gloves on. "What's her name?" "Nora Bennett." Something happened. It was very small, a fractional stillness, half a second where the machinery behind his eyes ran something and then put it away, and Nora saw it and did not understand it, and would not understand it for another 6 weeks. "Good night, Miss Bennett," he said. The founder's reception was held on the 9th in the ground floor gallery, under strings of lights that cost more than Nora's monthly aid. She was not supposed to be in it. She was supposed to be 4 floors up. But room 11's family had brought in an enormous tray of food they couldn't fit anywhere, and Gerald had ordered it taken to the reception kitchen, and there was nobody to carry it but Nora. She came through the gallery at 8:40 with a catering tray in both arms and 40 feet of open floor between her and the service door. Camilla Ashford was standing near the bar. Nora knew who she was. The way anyone in Chicago knew, the Ashford Foundation was on the wall by the elevators. 3rd name down, gold letters. Camilla was 34 and had the sculpted, effortful thinness of a woman for whom it is a full-time occupation, and she was there with 3 people who laughed on cue. She was also, according to 11 weeks of aide gossip, extremely interested in Damiano Vitale, and had been for 2 years, with nothing whatsoever to show for it. Nora was 12 feet from the service door when Camilla stepped sideways into the lane, holding her wine, not looking. The tray went into her elbow. Nothing spilled. Camilla made a small sound entirely for the room. "Oh, God, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, are you?" "No, it's fine, honestly." Camilla looked at her then, up and down, slowly. taking her time about it, and then turned to her friends with the sentence already assembled. You just don't expect it, do you? You think there's room, and then… She gestured, palm out, indicating Nora's entire body the way you'd indicate weather. Sweetie, you have to announce yourself for everyone's safety. The friends laughed, and Gerald Thorne, standing 8 feet away with a donor's coat over his arm, laughed too. One small huff through the nose, deniable, the coward's portion. Nora stood in the middle of 140 people holding a tray of somebody's mother's food. She did not cry, because she had not cried in front of anyone in 9 years, and she was not going to start under a string of rented lights. She said, "Excuse me," and carried the tray to the service door and set it down, and walked up 4 flights of stairs instead of taking the elevator because she needed the 4 flights. At the top she stopped, and put her hand on the cold painted cinder block, and breathed. At 11 o'clock she was in room 6, and Aurelio Vitale was having his worst night in a month. He was between places. His hands moved on the blanket, doing something they remembered, counting maybe, or dealing. He spoke in fragments, in 2 languages, to people who had been dead for decades. Nora had seen it 1,000 times. She sat where he could see her, and she kept her voice low and even, and she did not correct anything he said, because correcting them is cruelty dressed as honesty. Told him it was clean paper, Aurelio said. I told him, you don't put paper through a legitimate house. You put it through a house you own. Mr. Vitale, I'm going to lift your arm a little. He did it anyway. He did it anyway because he liked it better that way. He liked it, a wet, rattling breath. He liked burning a straight man. He said it was cheaper than buying one. Nora's hands kept moving. Her hands always kept moving. He put $900,000 of bad oncology through 4 drugstores, Aurelia said, perfectly clearly to the ceiling. A little green awning outfit run by a man who'd never had a parking ticket, and the man went to Terre Haute, and Cesare laughed about it at a table in front of me for 11 years. The room went very white at the edges. Mr. Vitale. Her voice came out level. She would never afterward know how. Cesare who? His hand came up off the blanket and closed around her wrist. It should not have had that much strength in it. Bruno, said Aurelio Vitale. Cesare Bruno. He's still sitting in that chair on a Sunday. He's still eating. Nora looked up. Damiano was standing in the doorway with his coat still on and snow melting on the shoulders. She had no idea how long he had been there. He waited until she came out. The corridor at midnight was lit at half strength, and he stood under the dead section between 2 fixtures where the light didn't reach, and Nora came out of room 6 with her hands still not quite steady and stopped. How much of that did you hear? She said. All of it. He's not oriented. He's been in and out since, Ms. Bennett. Damiano did not raise his voice. Your father was Thomas Bennett. Bennett Drug. 4 stores. Convicted in federal court on a distribution charge in October 12 years ago and dead at Terre Haute 3 years later of an infected tooth. He watched her face. I've known that since the night I asked your name. Nora put her back against the wall. How? Because I have spent 4 years trying to take Cesare Bruno apart, and Lakeshore Medical Supply is one of the 4 doors I have never been able to get open. He said it flatly, the way a man reads a number off a page. Your father's name is in the middle of it. So is a warehouse in Cicero. So is a woman named Eleanor Prescott, who chaired the State Pharmacy Board in the year the licenses were pulled and who now chairs the foundation whose name is on the wall by your elevator. Prescott. Nora's mouth was dry. She's on our board. She's on 11 boards. That's what she is. He looked toward room 6. My father has been dying for 6 weeks and talking for 4 of them. To you, not to me. And in 4 weeks, he has said more about the inside of Bruno's operation to a night nurse he met in January than he said to his own son in a decade. He doesn't know he's saying it. I'm aware. Then you should also be aware, Nora said, that I'm not going to repeat any of it. That got his attention properly. His head came around. Say that again. I said I'm not going to repeat it. Her voice was shaking now and she let it. You want to know what I do for a living? I sit with people while they stop being able to hold anything back. 11 years. They tell me about affairs, money they stole, children they've never told anyone about. A man last spring told me where his brother is buried, and it isn't a cemetery. She pushed off the wall. Every one of them told me because I was the only one in the room, and they were past being able to help it. And I have never once, not one time, carried a single word of it out that door. It's the only thing I own, Mr. Vitale. It's the whole job. Damiano Vitale looked at her the way a man looks at a piece of ground he wasn't expecting to be solid. That name is the reason your father died, he said. I know. And you'd still keep it. He's my patient, said Nora Bennett. The two things are not connected in this building. There was a long silence in that corridor. Then I'll get it another way, Damiano said at last. And you'll keep your hands clean, and neither of us will mention this again. He turned to go. Wait. She heard herself say it. Mr. Vitale. Wait. She heard herself say it. Mr. Vitale. Wait. He waited. And Nora, who had never asked a single person in her adult life for anything, said the thing she had absolutely not planned to say. My mother is dying too, she said. Not like him, slower. She had a stroke 14 months ago, and she's lost most of her words, and she's 66, and she's been a nurse since she was 19, so she knows exactly what's coming, which is the worst part. Her eyes were burning. And she has one thing she says. It's one of about 40 phrases she has left. She says it every time I leave. She says, not alone, not alone. She means me. She means she can't go while she thinks I'll be by myself. Damiano said nothing. My father's memorial mass is on the 28th. 12 years. My mother's whole parish will be there, and my aunts, and every person who's asked me the same question every Christmas since I was 24. Nora's laugh came out wrong, and I have exactly 1 week of my mother having enough words left to understand a sentence. The neurologist said so on Tuesday. Still nothing. I'm asking you for one night, she said. That's it. 1 hour even. You walk in with me. You shake 4 hands. You stand next to me at the front. And my mother sees it and she stops saying not alone. And then you never think about any of this again. She made herself finish it. Can you pretend to be my husband? For 1 night? The corridor hummed. Damiano Vitale turned around fully and came back and stopped an arm's length from her and looked at her for what felt like a very long time. No, he said. Nora's stomach dropped through the floor. Right. No, of course, I shouldn't have Nora. She stopped. Not for 1 night, said Damiano Vitale. I don't, forever, he said. The wind moved against the window at the end of the corridor. You don't have to understand it tonight, he said, in exactly the same tone he used for everything, which was somehow the most frightening part. But I'm not going to walk into your father's memorial and lie to a dying woman for an hour and then leave, because that's a cruelty with a bow on it, and I've done enough cruel things without bows. So it isn't 1 night. Either I don't come at all, or I come as something that's true, and it stays true after everyone goes home. You met me in January. I know what I meant. That's not people don't. People do, he said, once or twice. Most of them don't recognize it and spend 40 years being polite about it. He put his gloves on, unhurried. You spent 11 years being the only person in a room while somebody stopped being able to pretend. Tell me you don't know when a thing is true. Nora Bennett stood in a hospice corridor at midnight and could not produce a single word. The 28th, Damiano said. What time? 10 in the morning. St. Barbara's. I'll be at your mother's at 9. He pressed the elevator. Marchetti will drive. Don't argue about the car. It isn't about the car. It's about the street your mother lives on, Mr. Vitale. The doors opened. Damiano, he said, and got in. He was at the Bridgeport 3 flat at 8:51. Nora had been awake since 4. She had a black dress laid out that she had owned for 6 years, which she had bought for a different funeral, and which was designed on the theory that if a garment is dark enough and shapeless enough, A woman disappears inside it, which was the only kind of clothing she had ever bought. She was still holding it when the buzzer went. "You're early. You said 10. Traffic on Archer." He looked past her into the apartment. "Is she awake?" "She's been awake since 6. She's been asking about the thing," Nora's voice caught. "She means her wedding ring. She wants to wear it, and she can't say what it is, so she's been pointing at her hand for 2 hours and getting angrier, and I've been—" "Nora," she stopped. "Go and get her ring," he said, "and I'll wait here, and neither of us is going to be early to anything." There was a woman with him in the hall, 60s, silver bob, an enormous leather case in each hand. "This is Fabienne's second," Damiano said. "The dress is in the car. I have a dress. You have a dress you bought to be invisible in." He said it without any edge at all, which somehow made it worse. "Fabienne sent 3. He recommended the gray one. He recommended it twice, in writing, with a paragraph about verticals and about, I believe the phrase was softening the silhouette, and then a second paragraph about how nobody wants to be the story at a memorial. He's not wrong. He is entirely wrong, and I told him so, and then I told him to send the Burgundy one instead and to stop working for me." Damiano handed over the garment bag. "You're burying your father today in front of every person who watched him get taken out of a drugstore in handcuffs. You are not going to do that in something apologetic." Nora stood in the hallway of her mother's building holding a garment bag. "Why Burgundy?" she said. "Because it's the color of something that survived," said Damiano Vitale. "And because when you came out of room 6 on the 9th of January you had been crying in a stairwell for 4 minutes. And the whole way up in that elevator I decided that whatever else happened, nobody in this city was ever going to make you carry a tray past them again." She looked up sharply. "You weren't there." "I was in the car outside," he said. "I saw it through the glass. Camilla Ashford has not been able to reach me on a telephone since." Margaret Bennett was in her chair by the window with her ring on and her hair done and her chin up. She had been a nurse for 31 years, and she had been Thomas Bennett's wife for 34. And the stroke had taken the words for objects and left absolutely all of the intelligence behind them. She looked at her daughter. Then she looked at the man standing behind her daughter in a black overcoat, and she looked at him for a long, long time, in the specific way that only a woman who has done 3 decades of night shifts can look at somebody. "You," Margaret said. "Mrs. Bennett, you." Her hand came up. Her jaw worked. The word wasn't there. She made a fist and pressed it against her own chest, hard, twice. "She's asking what you do," Nora said quietly. "That's her sign for it. It means work." Damiano crossed the room and crouched down in front of the chair so that Margaret did not have to look up at him. "I'm not going to lie to you," he said. "You've been a nurse for 31 years. You'll know inside a minute anyway." Margaret's eyes did not move off him. "My name is Damiano Vitale. My father is dying on your daughter's floor at St. Bridget. The men in my family have been in Chicago since 1931, and almost none of what we do is legal." He said it clearly and slowly, without any performance in it at all. "The man who put your husband in Terre Haute is named Cesare Bruno. He is 74 years old, and he is having lunch this afternoon on Taylor Street. I intend to take everything he has. Your daughter has said nothing to me about any of it, and won't, because she thinks her patient's words belong to them, and she's right. And it's the only thing anybody has said to me in 4 years that I couldn't argue with." The room was completely silent. "I met her 3 weeks ago," Damiano said. "I'm not going to insult you by explaining that." Margaret Bennett looked at him, and then this woman who had 39 words left in the whole world reached out with her good hand, took hold of the front of his coat, pulled him in, and used one of them. "Good," she said. Nora had to leave the room. The mass was full. 200 people. Every parishioner Margaret had ever brought a casserole to, and every pharmacist on the south side who had known Thomas, and 4 aunts, and a back row of people who had come for the reason people come to those things. Nora Bennett walked in beside Damiano Vitale in burgundy wool with her spine straight, and the church did not go silent. Churches don't, but a sound went through it. the low collective adjustment of 200 people all revising something at once. She had expected to feel like a fraud. She did not. That was the part she couldn't explain afterward. Not to Grace, not to herself. She stood at the front of St. Barbara's with his hand at the small of her back, in front of the framed photograph of a man in a green apron, and what she felt was not a lie. It was the thing she had been carrying alone for 12 years, suddenly having somebody standing under the other end of it. Preston Wilder was in the 4th row. She hadn't seen him in 7 years. He had been her fiancé for 14 months, and he had ended it 11 weeks after her father's conviction in a parking garage with a speech about how his family had a position and how she surely understood. And the last thing he ever said to her was that she had let herself go since the trial, which she had thought about on and off roughly twice a week ever since. He came up at the reception in the parish hall with his hand already out. "Nora! Nora, my God! Hey! You look... wow!" His eyes did the whole circuit. "You look really well. That's honestly good for you, Preston. And this is..." He turned, delighted, already halfway into the anecdote he'd be telling at dinner. "I'm Preston Wilder. Nora and I were..." Damiano did not take the hand. He looked at it and then at Preston and said nothing whatsoever, and let the silence run 4 full seconds past the point where a human being can survive it. "Right," Preston said. "Right. Okay." He went away. Grace Molina, who had driven down from Berwyn in a car with a bad heater, watched the whole thing over a paper cup of coffee. "Honey," she said, "what in God's name is happening in your life? I genuinely have no idea." "Well..." Grace looked across the hall to where Damiano was crouched beside Margaret's chair again, listening to a woman with 39 words, with the patience of a man with nowhere else to be. "Whatever it is, don't let anybody talk you out of it, including you. Aurelio Vitale died on the 3rd of February at 4:40 in the morning. Nora was with him. Damiano was on the other side of the bed. It took about 90 minutes, and it was not peaceful, and Nora did the thing she had done 400 times. The sponge on the lips, the pillow, the hand, and near the end the old man surfaced one final time and looked at his son and said something in Italian that Nora did not understand. And Damiano's face broke entirely for about 2 seconds. Then it closed again. She did not ask. She waited 11 days, and on the 11th day, in her mother's kitchen at 2 in the morning, he told her. He said, "Don't do it the way I did it." He was standing at the window with a cup of tea he had not touched. "My brother Matteo was 26, Damiano said. 4 years ago in March, a restaurant on Taylor Street, in the middle of a Sunday, in front of 40 people, and every one of those 40 people discovered that afternoon that they had been looking at the menu. His hands were flat on the counter. I have known for 4 years who paid for it. I have never been able to prove one line of it. And my father spent those 4 years telling me to wait. And I spent those 4 years thinking he'd gone soft. And he was dying the entire time, and I didn't know." Nora came and stood beside him and did not say any of the things people say. She put her hand over his, flat on the counter, and left it there. Neither of them moved for a long time. That was the first night he stayed until morning, and nothing happened except that he slept for 4 hours on her mother's sofa, which was, Nora suspected, the first 4 consecutive hours he'd had since October. The first strike came out of a name. She had not broken her rule. She had thought about it every night for 6 weeks, and she had not broken it. And Damiano had never once asked her to. What happened instead was that on the last night of February, a man was admitted to room 12, Nunzio Salerno, 83, pancreatic, metastatic, 4 to 6 weeks. No family listed. Private pay. Nora read the intake and then read the emergency contact line, and the emergency contact line said E. Prescott, Ashford Foundation, and Nora Bennett stood at the nurse's station at 2 in the morning with a chart in her hands and felt the floor tilt. She did not go to Damiano. She went to the man in room 12 because that was her job, and she sat with him for 4 nights and gave him ice and turned him and listened to him talk about a wife who had died in 1998. On the fifth night, Nunzio Salerno said, "You're the one that sat with Aurelio." "I am. He was a hard man. He was fair, though." A pause. "Nobody's coming for me. You know that? 51 years I did the books for those people. And there's one name on my sheet, and it's a woman I met twice. Mr. Salerno, I want to make a statement," he said. Nora went very still. "I don't mean to you. I know the rules, sweetheart. I've been in rooms like this." His eyes came over. "I mean, I want a lawyer, and I want a federal agent, and I want it on a recording with a date on it. Because I have 11 weeks, and I am not going into the ground as the only honest set of books that man ever had." His breath rattled. "Can you get me a telephone that isn't the one on that wall?" Nora Bennett put down the cup of ice. "Mr. Salerno," she said, "I want you to listen to me very carefully, because I need this to be yours and not mine. I'm not going to suggest anything to you. I'm not going to give you a name. I'm going to ask you one question." She sat down. "Do you want me to call your lawyer, or do you want me to call the U.S. Attorney's office in the morning and tell them a witness in a federal matter is asking for them?" The old man smiled at the ceiling. "You've done this before." "Twice," Nora said. "Both times it was a will." "The second one," said Nunzio Salerno. She made the call at 9 the next morning, from the hospice's own landline, in front of Grace Molina, with a note in the chart. Entirely by the book. Entirely inside her job. 2 federal agents and an assistant U.S. attorney were in room 12 by 4 that afternoon, and they were there every day for 9 days, and the dying bookkeeper of the Bruno family talked for 19 hours on a video recording with a date stamp on it. Nora never sat in on a single minute of it. She didn't have to. She'd built the door. Somebody else walked through. The retaliation came through an IV bag. Nora had been at St. Munna, Bridget, 11 years, and in 11 years she had made 2 medication errors, both minor, both self-reported, both in her first 18 months. She checked everything. She checked it out loud, alone, at 3 in the morning, because that was how Margaret Bennett had raised her. On the 14th of March, at 2:50 a.m., C went into room 12 to hang Nunzio Salerno's overnight infusion. The bag was correct, the label was correct. The pharmacy barcode scanned green, and the concentration was wrong. Not dramatically. Not so anybody would question a single number in isolation. The hydromorphone was running at 4 times the ordered rate in a formulation the facility pharmacy stocked but almost never dispensed, on a standing order that had been entered into the system at 6:12 the previous evening under the credentials of a physician named Adrian Cole. Dr. Cole was St. Bridget's part-time medical director. He had lost his admitting privileges at 2 suburban hospitals for reasons the state medical board had described in a single vague paragraph, and he had come to hospice work, which is where a certain kind of doctor goes. Nora stood in room 12 at 10 to 3 in the morning with a bag in her hand. An hour of that infusion on an 83-year-old with 4 weeks of liver left would have looked like exactly what everybody in the building was already expecting. A dying man died in the night. Nobody would have ordered an autopsy. Nobody orders an autopsy on a hospice patient. That is the entire point of the place. She did not hang it. She photographed the bag, the label, the pump settings, and the order screen. She pulled the order and documented the refusal in the chart with the time to the minute. She called the on-call attending at 3:04 and had the original order reinstated verbally and witnessed. She bagged the incorrect infusion, wrote her initials and the date across the seal in permanent marker, and locked it in the narcotic safe, of which she had one of the 4 keys. And then she called the federal agent whose card was taped inside the front of Nunzio Salerno's chart, because that was where the agent had put it, and told him exactly what had happened in 4 flat sentences. She did not call Damiano. He found out at 3:40 from Enzo, who had a man in the lobby of that building 24 hours a day and had for 6 weeks. He came through the 4th-floor doors at 3:52. Nora had seen him composed at his father's deathbed. She had seen him composed in a church full of people who were afraid of him. She had never seen this. He crossed that corridor in 8 strides, and took her by both shoulders. "Are you hurt?" "No. Damiano, did anybody touch you?" "Nobody touched me." "Listen. Where is Cole?" "He's not in the building. He entered it remotely at 6:12. He wasn't even." She got both hands on his chest and pushed, hard, and got him to stop. "Damiano, look at me. It's already done. It's already handled. I photographed everything. I documented everything. I have the bag in the safe with my initials on the seal, and the federal agent has been on the phone with the AUSA for 30 minutes. Her voice was shaking and her hands were not. "They didn't get him. He's alive in that room and he's going to finish his statement, and now there is an attempted homicide of a federal witness sitting on top of everything else. And I did all of it inside my scope of practice with a witness for every single step." Damiano Vitale stared at her. "You caught it at 3 in the morning," he said, "on a barcode that scanned green. The barcode scans the drug. It doesn't scan the concentration." She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. "You have to read it. Everybody stops reading it after about a year." "You didn't." "No," said Nora. "I didn't." He kissed her in the corridor of the 4th floor of St. Brigid Palliative at 4 in the morning under a light that had been flickering since December, with one hand at the back of her neck and the other at her waist, and there was nothing careful about it at all. It had the whole drive from Grand Avenue in it. It had 4 years of arriving too late, and 40 people looking at a menu on Taylor Street, and every red light between there and here. Nora took a fistful of his coat and pulled him in harder. When they came apart, he kept his forehead against hers. "They came for a witness in your building," he said, very low, "on a night you were on the floor. If that bag had gone up, you'd have hung it. Your name would have been on the pump." Nora went cold. "That wasn't only about Nunzio." "No," said Damiano Vitale. "It wasn't." He stood at the window at the end of the corridor for a long time after that, looking down at Ogden Avenue. And when he finally spoke, it was in a voice she had never heard him use. "Cole's standing order went in at 6:12, he said. Who knew Salerno was talking to the government? 4 people here. The agent, the AUSA, and on my side," Damiano said. 3. Me. Enzo. He did not turn around. "And the man who has run my father's book since 2011. Renzo Fontana," he said, "carried my brother's casket." Salvatore Conti had been consigliere to Aurelio Vitale for 31 years and had not raised his voice since the Carter administration. He listened to all of it at a table in the back of a shuttered social club on Grand Avenue. The order, the timestamp, the concentration, the 3 names, and then he took his glasses off and set them down and pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. "Damiano," he said, "ask her the pharmacy question." Everyone looked at Nora. "Which pharmacy question? You said the formulation is one your facility stocks and almost never dispenses." Salvatore's voice was very tired. "Where does St. Brigid buy its compounded infusions?" Nora had to look it up on her phone. It took 90 seconds. She read the answer twice before she said it out loud. "Lakeshore Specialty Compounding," she said. "Cicero." Nobody at that table moved. "It's not the same company," Nora said. "Lakeshore Medical Supply dissolved in the year my father was convicted. This is a different entity, different EIN, incorporated 8 years ago." "By whom?" said Salvatore Conti. She scrolled. She found it, and there, on a public Secretary of State filing that had been sitting on the open internet for 8 years, where anybody could have looked at it, under registered agent, was a name. R. Fontana. Damiano Vitale sat back in his chair very slowly. "He's been holding the door for Bruno for 8 years, he said, "inside a company with my father's business on one side of it and her father's grave on the other. And I have driven past that building 400 times. "He was the one who told you Lakeshore was a dead end," Nora said quietly. "Yes. 4 years ago." "Yes," said Damiano. Salvatore Conti put his glasses back on. Then it was never 4 doors, the old man said. It was 3 doors and a man standing in front of the 4th one, telling you it was a wall. What Nora said next, she had thought about for 11 days. Don't do it the way he did it. Damiano's head came up. Your father's last sentence. She held his eyes. You want Renzo in a car tonight. I know you do. And if you do that, this whole thing dies with him, and Cesare Bruno eats lunch on Taylor Street on Sunday, and you become a man on the 10 o'clock news by Friday. Nora, my father spent 19 months telling the truth to people who wouldn't listen, and he lost because he had nothing in his hands. Her voice stayed level. We have 19 hours of video with a date stamp. We have a compounding license, a standing order at 6:12 p.m., entered under a suspended physician's credentials, an infusion bag in a safe with my initials on the seal, and a registered agent filing anybody in the world could have pulled for $9. She leaned forward. Take everything from them in daylight, on paper, with their own names on it, and put me in the room when it happens. Enzo Marchetti spoke for the first time in an hour. She's right, boss. The dismantling took 22 days, and it went in the order Nora chose. Adrian Cole folded first, in an interview room, in under 3 hours, which surprised nobody. He gave them the payment structure, the dates, and the intermediary was a fund administrator at the Ashford Foundation, and the fund administrator reported to Eleanor Prescott. Nora sat across a conference table from Eleanor Prescott on a Thursday morning with 2 federal attorneys beside her and slid one photocopy across the wood. Prescott was 71. She had chaired the state pharmacy board in the year Bennett Drugs' 4 licenses were pulled. She had signed the order. You have until 5 o'clock this afternoon, Nora said, to resign every seat you hold and hand your foundation's grant records over voluntarily. Voluntarily is the better version. I'd encourage you to take it. My father didn't get offered it. Eleanor Prescott looked at the photocopy, then at Nora. I'm sorry, she said. Who exactly are you? I'm the night nurse on the 4th floor of a building with your name in gold letters by the elevator, said Nora Bennett. You've walked past me 4 times. You've never once said good evening. She resigned at 4:35. The Ashford collapse took 9 days, and Nora did not lift one finger for any of it, which turned out to be the sweetest part. When the foundation's grant records went in 3 generations of Ashford money, proved to have been washing through the same set of Cicero entities, and the accounts froze, and the name on the wall by the elevator was taken down on a Tuesday by 2 men with a drill. Camilla came to the Bridgeport 3 flat in the rain in May. She stood on the steps with no speech prepared, which was the first honest thing Nora had ever seen her do. They took the house in Winnetka, she said. They took my mother's. Nobody tells you, Nora. You're just handed it when you're 21 and you sign where they point. Her hands were shaking. 1 word from you. He'd listen to 1 word from you. He would, Nora agreed. Then say it. Nora looked at her for a while. On the 9th of January, she said, I was carrying a tray of a dying woman's family's food, and you stepped into me on purpose and told a room full of donors that I should announce myself. Camilla's face did what faces do. That was a joke. That was you can't possibly. Go home, Camilla. I don't have one. I know, said Nora, and shut the door and did not watch through the window, because she'd promised herself she wouldn't. Renzo Fontana was arrested on a Sunday morning in front of his mother's house in Elmwood Park on a federal warrant, without a shot fired, and Nora Bennett never once asked what Damiano had considered doing instead. Preston Wilder was never charged with anything because Preston Wilder had never in his life been near anything real. He simply discovered over the course of 1 spring that his firm no longer wanted him, that his club had a waiting list again, and that a certain kind of door had quietly stopped opening. He sent Nora a 4-paragraph message in June about how much he had grown. She read the first line and deleted it. And on the 9th of June, in a federal building on Dearborn Street, Nora sat in the 2nd row of a courtroom gallery and watched Cesare Bruno arraigned on 41 counts. He was 74, small, beautifully dressed, and he had the pleasant, unhurried face of a man who had never been asked to account for anything in his life. He looked around the gallery on his way in the way you'd scan a restaurant. His eyes went over Nora and kept going. She stood up. "Mr. Bruno." The marshal's hand came up. The room turned. Bruno stopped and looked at her with polite, total incomprehension. "I'm sorry," he said. "Have we met?" And Nora Bennett smiled, because that, precisely that, was the architecture of her entire life, handed to her one last time, gift-wrapped. "No," she said. "You've never met me. You put $900,000 of counterfeit oncology medication through 4 drugstores on the South Side 12 years ago, because you liked burning an honest man better than buying a crooked one. His name was Thomas Bennett. He had green awnings and he carried tabs for people through 2 recessions, and he died at Terre Haute of a tooth." The gallery was completely silent. "I'm his daughter," she said. "I've spent 11 years working nights 4 floors above a plaque with your friend's name on it, and not one person in your organization ever bothered to learn my face. And your bookkeeper spent 19 hours telling the government everything in a bed I made because I was the only one who came when he rang." Cesare Bruno's mouth opened. "You should also know," Nora said, "that when your doctor tried to kill him in the night, I was the nurse on the floor. I read the bag. I always read the bag." The judge asked her to sit down. She sat down. She had said everything she came to say, and she never spoke to him again. But at the door on his way out, Cesaruno turned his head and looked back at her. And then he knew exactly who she was completely far too late, and Nora Bennett let him carry that out of the room with him. They were married in September at St. Barbara's with the doors open onto the street. Margaret Bennett walked her daughter down the aisle. She had been in speech therapy 5 days a week since March, paid for by nobody's charity, and she had 106 words now instead of 39, and she had spent 11 weeks working on 4 of them in particular. At the front, she took her daughter's hand and put it into Damiano Vitale's, and she looked him in the face, and she used them. "You keep her safe. Every day I'm alive," he said. Grace Molina cried from the second pew and blamed the incense. Enzo Marchetti stood at the end of the aisle in a suit that had lost the argument with his shoulders and wept openly and dared anybody to remark on it. Salvatore Conti, 80 years old, gave the blessing. Most of it was in Italian. The part he said in English was this: "This family buried a son and trusted the man who sold him, and it learned nothing from either." Then a woman who sits with the dying walked into a room on Ogden Avenue and took 4 years of our failure apart in 5 months, without ever once breaking her own rule. Not one rule. Not one time. He paused and looked out over 400 people. Remember that she did all of it inside the law, and ask yourselves what she would be capable of if anyone here were ever stupid enough to make her step outside it. Nobody laughed. That was rather the point. Nora wore deep burgundy, because the color belonged to her now, and she did not take in 1 inch of anything to make a single person in that church more comfortable. And at the end of the Mass, at the front, with 200 people watching, Damiano Vitale leaned in and said 1 word against her ear. The same word he had answered her with in a hospice corridor in January, when she had asked him for a single hour and he had refused to give her anything so small. "Forever," he said. So this is the story of a woman who spent 11 years as the last person in the room anybody bothered to look at, and who found out that she had been standing at the center of everything the entire time, holding it all in her hands, keeping it, because keeping it was the whole job. They mocked her body while she was learning their secrets. They laughed at her in a room full of donors, while their names were being written down 4 floors above their heads. And when it came apart in the exact order she chose, in daylight, on paper, without her ever once breaking the only promise she had. They thought the woman with the cup wasn't worth noticing. It cost them everything they had, and not one of them saw the bill coming. If Nora's reckoning gave you chills, hit that like button and share this with somebody who loves a heroine, who takes her own power instead of waiting to be handed it. Subscribe for a new full-length dark romance every week, and tell me down in the comments, Camilla, Preston, Renzo, or Bruno, which one of them deserved it most?